And greetings, friends around the world, whenever and wherever you may be. This is Bobby D. Moore speaking. Whether or not aspartame, the artificial sweetener, is demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt to cause cancer is beside the point. The point is, if there is a good chance that it does, stop using it. In doing my homework on aspartame for this broadcast, reading the conflicting research reports and the blogs written by people who are apparently in love with it, I came away astounded. I was not astounded by the scientific claims for or against it, but by the stupidity of some users who defend it as if it were the very air they breathe. Are they so hedonistic, so shallow in their thinking, that they would risk even a small chance of developing an incurable disease as terrible as cancer, just to satisfy their craving for sweets? Sadly, the answer is yes. One mother lamented the fact that because of a medical condition, her daughter would be unable to know the joy of sweets without aspartame. When I read stuff like this, my confidence in the intelligence of the American consumer takes a nosedive. Listen, lady, the human race existed long before refined sugar or aspartame was ever developed. And believe it or not, we got along quite well without it. Good grief! Give the kid an apple and a handful of pecans. In a case like that of aspartame, it is difficult at best to get to the absolute truth. Whose numbers do you believe? Whose scientific reports do you believe? And if you actually read the reports yourself from their original sources, would you understand what you read? The answer is that as an undereducated member of the dumbed-down masses, you don't know what to believe. And you would not understand the original research studies if you read them. I should say if you could read them. So, does this mean that you are at the mercy of the promoters of this product and others like it? No, not at all. First of all, learn. Now, this is not as easy as it may seem, because your sources of information, for the most part, are controlled or influenced by powerful interests which have a vested interest in promoting their particular agenda or product. They spend multiple millions of dollars on so-called public relations campaigns and massive advertising to mold the way you think and to influence the decisions you make. Secondly, use some plain old horse sense. Most corporations which develop pharmaceuticals operate for one single purpose, above all others, and that is to make a profit. The bottom line is profit or loss. A chemical company may spend a very large amount of money in developing and testing a product before it's ever released for sale. If the product is not approved by the FDA in the case of food products, the Food and Drug Administration, for use by the public, then the money spent for research may not be quickly recouped, tax write-offs notwithstanding. So, you can understand why the corporation will go to great extremes to assure the approval of its product. Those extremes may include extensive lobbying, massive advertising, and the exercise of political influence. We deliberately avoid the use of the term bribery. The influence may extend to underwriting research, which is likely to produce results favorable to the product, and even to discrediting other research which produces unfavorable results. The battle lines are clearly drawn between refined sugar and artificial sweeteners. It's simple. For every pound of artificial sweetener used, be it aspartame or something similar, less sugar is sold, considerably less. Again, as in so many of the other topics we research, it all comes down to money. Big money, involving international corporations and international financial interests. Fortunately, you still have a choice of whether or not to use aspartame. My choice, based upon the information available to me and my understanding of it, and the horse sense I talked about earlier, is not to use it. I avoid it or any product which contains it, like the plague. And you have that same choice. Living without aspartame definitely will not cause you to have cancer. Think about it from that angle. A small part of the information about aspartame which is available to me and to you, and to anyone else who cares to know, was published on the web as How Aspartame Became Legal, the timeline at rense.com. Following are some facts taken from that report. It is clearly written in layman's terms, and we urge you to read the entire report. Like many other chemical discoveries, aspartame's discovery was accidental. A chemist by the name of James Schlatter came across it while he was working on a drug intended to treat ulcers. And this amazing material was 180 times sweeter than sugar, yet contained absolutely no calories. While wasting no time, in the spring of 1967, G.D. Searle, the company for which Schlatter worked, began safety tests on aspartame which were necessary to apply for FDA approval for its use as a food additive. And later that same year, Dr. Harold Weissman, a biochemist at the University of Wisconsin, conducted a series of safety tests on aspartame on behalf of Searle. In these tests, 7 infant monkeys were fed aspartame mixed with milk. 1 died and 5 suffered grand mal seizures. In 1970, cyclamate was removed from the market after being viewed as a possible cancer-inducing agent, and saccharin lost much of its appeal as an artificial sweetener for the same reason. The time appeared right to introduce a new synthetic sweetener, and Searle Company executives laid the groundwork for a campaign to get federal approval for aspartame. In 1971, a study was conducted by Dr. John Olney, which demonstrated that aspartic acid, an ingredient of aspartame, caused holes to form in the brains of infant mice. His findings were later confirmed by a Searle's researcher. In 1973, the Searle's application to the FDA was rejected, citing a need for more clinical studies. But in 1974, FDA granted Searle permission to use aspartame in certain dry foods. That same year, the first objections to aspartame's approval by the FDA were filed. These objections triggered a 1976 investigation by the FDA of Searle's laboratory testing practices. A report from this investigation revealed shoddy, inaccurate testing and manipulated test results. The investigators reported that they had, quote, never seen anything as bad as Searle's testing. Apparently, it was bad enough to prompt the Food and Drug Administration to formally request the Attorney General's office to begin grand jury proceedings against Searle. Now, here is where things begin to get interesting. While the grand jury probe was in progress, lawyers for G.D. Searle, that is, Sidley and Austin, began talks with the U.S. lawyer in charge of the investigation against Searle, Samuel Skinner. And what was the topic of their negotiations? The possibility of Skinner's coming to work for Searle's law firm. Wow! A few months later, Skinner quit his government job and went to work for Sidley and Austin. Wow again. While Skinner's withdrawal and resignation in 1977 stalled the grand jury investigation for so long that the statute of limitations on the aspartame charges expired, and of course the investigation was dropped. Now, isn't it amazing what money and influence can do? But you ain't heard nothing yet. In 1980, a public board of inquiry, earlier established by the FDA, ruled that NutraSweet, that is aspartame, should not be approved pending further investigation into whether or not it caused brain tumors in animals. the board did not view aspartame as safe for human consumption. Earlier, in 1977, former Congressman Donald Rumsfeld had been hired by Cyril as chief executive officer, and now he vowed in a sales meeting to turn the beleaguered company around by trying to get aspartame approved, not by scientific means, but through political pull in Washington. Ah, yes. In 1981, when Ronald Reagan became president, guess who Reagan picked to be on his transition team? The one and only Donald Rumsfeld, Chief Executive Officer of G.D. Searles. And Rumsfeld immediately handpicked Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes, Jr. to be the new commissioner of, guess what? The good old Food and Drug Administration. Gosh, what an amazing and convenient coincidence. In March 1981, the FDA Commissioners Panel was established to review issues related to aspartame. 3 of the 6 FDA scientists responsible for studying the brain tumor claims ruled against the approval of aspartame, that is NutraSweet. Ignoring their advice, Arthur Hull Hayes overruled the Board of Public Inquiry and the recommendations of his own FDA team and approved NutraSweet for use in dry food products. Well, not wasting any time, in 1982, Cyril applied to the FDA for acceptance of aspartame as a sweetener in carbonated beverages and other liquids. Now get this. In 1983, the National Soft Drink Association drafted an objection to the final ruling on aspartame's acceptance by the FDA. They didn't want it. They viewed it as unsafe. And on August 8, 1983, Jim Turner, consumer attorney of the Community Nutrition Institute, and Dr. Woodrow Monte, Arizona State University's Director of Food Science and Nutritional Laboratories, filed suit with the FDA objecting to aspartame's approval, based upon unresolved safety issues. The very next month, September 1983, good old Commissioner Hayes resigned his high-flying position as Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. Seems he was accused of taking perks from General Foods, a major customer of NutraSweet. But not to worry. Hayes was immediately hired as Senior Scientific Advisor by Burson Marsteller. That's the G.D. Searles public relations firm. And finally, in the autumn of 1983, the first carbonated beverages containing aspartame were sold to the gullible public, and you've been enjoying it ever since. Now, if you would like to pursue the twisted trail of aspartame and other artificial sweeteners, have at it. For me, even a small dose of this kind of sweet intrigue goes a long, long way. So until next time, this is Bobby D. Moore saying, goodbye, friends. Does God exist is documented and verifiable, and has been called by some a revelation from God. Thousands of copies have been distributed since its creation, and it has become a collector's item. Now you can receive your own copy of Does God Exist, free of charge, simply by asking for it. All you have to do is send an email to bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com and say, send me the CD. Tell us where to send it, and your copy will be on its way to you as soon as possible and as long as supplies permit. That address again is bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com.